It's my great privilege to be moderating this panel discussion on supporting equitable sustainability. We heard just about the imperative of equitable outcomes, and with the climate crisis, with our social crisis, our health crisis, there are so many things coming together, so many challenges, but so many opportunities. And I think like much of today in the sessions, this session is about challenging the Passive House community to rise to the occasion, to see the power of Passive House and extend it. We need to be modest in what any one project might be able to do, but we need to be bold and take risks with it. And I think it's important. I just want to note that we see the direct linkage of social equity outcomes with our climate outcomes. And so while many of us are compelled on the climate side to see the equivalence and the interdependence of the social outcomes, that it's the same kind of thinking, it's the same industry, it's the same system that has created both of these problems and many other that we're carrying around and dealing with and trying to repair today. And so we need to be thinking harder about what we should be doing. So I'm honored with that to briefly introduce our panelists. I'll start with Gregory King, as the Managing Director of TSK Energy Solutions, a Black-owned and operated consultancy focused on energy innovations, workforce development, and environmental justice. Greg's work is focused on reshaping how stakeholders collaborate for social and climate impact. Greg facilitates and enhances collaboration on complex social and environmental issues by using technology to encourage learning and innovation. Beverly Craig, somehow it went in order. You guys sat in the order of my intro.
We got the memo.
Beverly is the Senior Project Manager at the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center and manages the Mass CEC's Passive House Design Challenge for Affordable Housing and the Triple Decker Design Challenge. This may be a little dated, this bio is quite the same, right? She has recently assisted Mass CEC's workforce team in launching funding opportunities for support of minority and women-owned business enterprises in climate-critical business sectors and workforce training for residents of Massachusetts environmental justice communities. Aidan Callan is the Carbon Neutrality Project Manager at the City of Boston's Environment Department. He's working to implement the Building Emissions Reduction and Disclosure Ordinance, affectionately known as BERDO, in Boston's largest buildings. He moved to Boston from Connecticut to work for the utility benchmarking and analytics company WegoWise. And this included working with Boston property managers and owners to analyze, interpret, and report their utility data to BERDO. Corey Thompson is the founder and managing principal of Mobius LLC. Corey is an architect and has worked in commercial real estate, architectural design, and construction for over 25 years, serving as Director of Operations and Manager of Residential and Light Commercial Projects from start to finish. He is also an active Dorchester resident, serving as the Vice President of the West of Washington Coalition, Zoning Committee for Greater Mattapan Neighborhood Council, and on the Board of Directors for Builders of Color Coalition. So thank you all for being here. So the subject at hand is supporting equitable sustainability, supporting, so we're talking about, the levers of money and power, I guess, it boils down to. And so we, had, I think, a taste in the last discussion, and certainly we're aware in our lives, many of these issues. But I'm hoping to kick this off, Greg, with you to give a little bit of maybe lay out the context a little bit about the inequity problem due to lack of historic investment and the opportunities that you're seeing here today, particularly in the context of the climate action that we're taking as a Passive House community.
Yeah, Ken, thank you so much. First of all, I just want to give a shout out to Ken for organizing this conference. Can we give him a round of applause, please? Um, you know, you know, I am so grateful for Ken's effort to ensure that we had this conversation about equity from more than just one dimension. And so we need industries like the passive house industry. And I heard earlier someone use one of my favorite words, disruptors. We have a room full of disruptors. So, we're really excited about being here this afternoon and talking to disruptors about a huge challenge we have. I mean, I hear an awful lot today about, equity and inclusion, justice, and, the Jedi word, justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. And, we have to sort of recognize we're in a unique state because we have had, years and decades of systematic inequity. So often I like to remind people that we didn't get here overnight, but we are in a pretty deep hole. Recently I saw some data about the size of the energy transition globally. $165 trillion in capital is going to be required for us to decarbonize buildings, transportation, agriculture, and power generation. Honestly, it's the economic opportunity of a lifetime. But the $165 trillion question is, will that be an equitable and just transition? And it won't be unless we make it so. Here in Boston, considered to be one of the more liberal cities in the US, it's also the city that has the highest wealth disparity of major cities in the US. In a recent disparity study hosted by the city of Boston, indicated that only 0.6% of all the city's purchases went to a Black-owned business. So, we are in a unique state here, which is going to require, a lot of intention. I think the good news is that we, as an industry, particularly the clean energy industry, has sort of recognized this acute state of disparity and is really taking efforts like this conversation about how we can create more sustainable, equitable programs. And, my background is, my father was a builder. I grew up an entrepreneur from early days where I was free labor for my father building houses to starting and taking a software company public. So I'm an information technologist and a builder by I guess from DNA. And, I think that we need to look at systems of solutions for how do we, address, equity. Just like we talk about, we're going to decarbonize buildings using a very systematic approach. We need to recognize that we have to start thinking about the sustainable building environment as an ecosystem that we have to develop, and we have to develop it in a way that is inclusive of all talent. We're going to need everyone, all of us, to meet the challenge of climate change because it's a challenge of a lifetime. And on that note, I'm going to turn it over to Bev.
Sure. Well, exactly what question, though? The first.
Yeah, I mean, well, we're sort of laying out the historic problem, the challenge that we're facing, and we're kind of big picture opportunity, blue sky.
Yeah, big picture opportunity. I think Greg's completely right. With so many, New York, Massachusetts having a goal of getting to net zero by 2050, we're going to see a lot of job creation. We are. I think New York's thinking on some of the recent studies, 10 new jobs created for everyone that's lost in that energy transition. Massachusetts, it might be more like 4 or 5, but over half of those are likely buildings related. New construction and also retrofitting all of our existing buildings. And so that's a huge opportunity. It's also a huge challenge because we do want to make sure it's an equitable transition and that people who are getting those jobs and being trained for those jobs are coming from the communities, the environmental justice communities in particular, that have had disproportionate pollution and can actually participate in that just transition.
to sort of speak a little bit to the BERDO program and the existing building stock. The city's really focused on decarbonization of large buildings and taking the funds from buildings that can't meet certain emission standards and diverting it towards an equitable emissions investment fund, the rules of which have not yet been established, and I'll speak to that a little bit further.
Yeah.
But I don't have much else to say at this point.
Yeah, no problem. So I think we're going to step back a little bit into as well as, there have been lots of programs in the past. There's been different efforts of different sorts. And we find ourselves with statistics and conditions that nobody is happy with, and that we know needs righting. And I think we wanted to turn, Corey, to you and your experience in DC and here in Boston, Dorchester, as an architect and entrepreneur. I think from a system side, but from a personal side, from a business person side, what do you see when you look at the history and where we are today, and we're gearing up now for massive spending going forward, right? We're talking about we'll talk in a moment more about big ARPA money and other funding. What do you think about? What do you want to see?
Change, simply put. And coming from a perspective in the DC metropolitan area, thanks to the proximity to a lot of federal dollars, of federal funding, it really did trickle down into the area and how that impact passive house and the community as a whole. It elevated everyone's ability to afford a better life, and with that better life came better housing. And it was easier to sell someone that can afford the structures of passive house bones. When I take it down to the very simplest form of development, as a general contractor, as a builder, it starts with studs at the level that the homeowner knows. We're not going to talk about the foundation, which is very critical. Just the simple thing is, how do you orient the studs so that you can increase insulation, which is like basic steps. And you know what? I got to take it back a step, that I'm just so happy to be in a room filled with individuals that understand what I'm saying. One, so that I could talk ad nauseum about it. But two, it shows a level of care that we have for our environment and the communities that we will serve. And by doing so, it's on our backs to support the communities that we see impact by not having quality homes. And I'm taking it a little bit straight from the question because it was a tough one. And but to say that watching individuals that can't afford mold mitigation before they can get the passive house, the improved environment, is a big deal. And we're, nothing on the city, but yeah, you need to get this hurdle done first before we can start thinking about the bigger picture. So if anything can come from that today, just sparking those questions on how do we handle the low-hanging fruit so that a passive system can be truly implemented at a rate that everyone could afford.
Right, that's a great point. I think the idea of empowerment in understanding, in being able to have these things be affordable. I think one of the things, and we're going to move to the city and state kind of like funding paradigms here in a moment, these new programs. But before we get to that, just this idea of, how the money has traditionally flowed from the governments to individual nonprofits or organizations to communities, community governments to individuals. Like, where do you see opportunities in having more greater direct effect, maybe, or innovative ways of dealing with funding directly, like what you're saying, directly into people's pockets? They can afford to buy better homes. They can have better outcomes.
So,
Yeah, go. It's good.
so that is a paradigm that's facing this country, where how do we get those individuals that need better jobs, need funding to improve their living, that need social constructs that will help them, but in a holistic way. We don't want to just give you something. I want you to get the education, get the visualization of being able to even get it. If you can't see it, you can't even want it. So let's, I go back to the video that we're showing where the classroom kids, I love that. I mean, that was the highlight of my day. I saw kids really getting it at the very rudimentary building blocks of passive house systems. And it was done through, must have been fifth graders, because they were all smarter than me. Like, I'm not as smart as a fifth grader, but they really did great jobs of simplifying a fairly complex system through visualization that everyone can understand. And that's where it really needs to start. Because if you can be in school systems and show them, this is what a passive house is. Oh my gosh. I love my niece. She graduated this week and she wanted to be a turtle protector. Other kids were like fireman, doctor, lawyer. She said she wanted to be a turtle protector. I want kids to be saying, I want to be a passive house designer,
That class may have a few of those.
Yeah, exactly. So that's where I think the genesis of programs like that would be beneficial for all.
Yeah, Ken, and I think to build on Corey's point, we really need to invest in education. I think, energy burden is a reality around as we look at how do we decarbonize buildings. It is a certain sequence of operation that's going to be required for us to be able to decarbonize certain types of older buildings in particular, and not increase the homeowner energy burden. And so we need to kind of get out there and educate people about the fact that it's possible to build low energy buildings or to retrofit low energy buildings and to enable them to be completely electrified, and that there are lifetime benefits that we can reduce the energy burden. But again, we have to kind of look at this as a system. And I see our community-based organizations that are currently providing social services in environmental justice communities as organizations that we have to invest in, because they are our gateway to access to the workforce that we need, to homeowners that are out there that are living in less than optimal conditions, and to be able to outreach and provide some services to help them be able to navigate all of the complexities around these energy efficiency and decarbonization programs that are, really outside the capacity of most people, let alone trying to find a contractor that actually knows about a heat pump and can install it properly. So we have a lot of system-related work to do to recognize that we have to integrate our community-based organizations, our contractors, the employers, the homeowners, in a way that's educating them about what's possible, but also removing barriers that prevent them from accessing. If we kind of look at our system of electric rates in America, those systems are designed, they really have some unintended consequences. So low-income ratepayers pay typically the same amount as a market rate pay, but they don't have access to the energy efficiency program because there are barriers. So someone in Newton who pays a rate gets access to the solar incentives and the energy efficiency incentives. Someone in Lawrence or Lowell, because they don't necessarily have the down payment amount, do not. And so we have some unintended consequences of the systems we've created that we have to figure a way to reverse.
So I just want to go practical here.
Yeah.
I don't want to look back at old funding. I want to look at like what's available right now and what
Yeah.
can we use to help with these problems. So most states do have quite a bit of recovery money, ARPA money, and I would say almost all of them are spending a lot of it on workforce training. And so where do we find good models for how do we get folks who live in environmental justice communities using those workforce training and having them be practical for them and then setting them up with the jobs that are actually going to be expanding. And I will say New York, NYSERDA has been doing workforce training for priority populations for a decade now. And there are some really awesome examples in the last 10 years of programs that don't just give technical training, but actually recruit, provide support services to get people up to speed. So sometimes that's going to be, for an electrician, that might be a brush up on math and support, and it might be getting a driver's license that they might not have had access to before that technical training, and then actually connecting them with actual employers and de-risking the first bit of hiring, because a lot of workforce training happens on the job, let's be clear, and then mentoring beyond that. So I would say, if any of you are interested in seeing, so basically, well, first of all, a big thanks to Greg, because he and other advocates really have been working with the state legislature to get some funds to my agency to do workforce training for people who live in environmental justice communities. And so what we did right away was say, hey, NYSERDA, who are your favorites? And so we've had 2 webinars, actually, some really fantastic examples of, and these are programs that have waiting lists of people to get in. That like shows you that they are placing people 80% of the time in jobs if there's waiting lists on the front end. So, you can always go to our website and look at those webinars, but you can also talk to NYSERDA as well. And then another practical thing that ARPA money can be spent on, Mass CEC, we've had an internship program forever. Most people in Massachusetts only know us because of our internship program. So we basically pay companies that work in sustainability spaces to take summer interns. So it's historically been $16 an hour, and we are upping that. But so I think we hit 5,000 interns in 9 years, and it's awesome for the intern. It's also awesome for the company. And while our numbers in terms of diversity have really tracked with what college enrollment is, that's not what we want it. We want it to be at least what the state is, and so we've really made a concerted effort the last couple of years, hired some people to recruit underrepresented groups within our and really give them special support services. So I would say like that model, using ARPA money for those kinds of hands-on, like that's the perfect thing. All of you who work in architecture firms or engineering firms, and you want to give somebody a leg up and access to seeing what it's like in that job and the connections you have, like that's the right kind of program in my mind.
That's great. And so maybe we'll take it to Boston for a minute and talk about the Barreto scheme for funding going forward. Aiden.
Sure. So just to start off by giving a little overview of Barreto, it really establishes a pathway for large buildings in Boston to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. So starting in 2025, it sets an emissions standard For multifamily buildings, that's 4.1 kilograms of CO2 equivalent per square foot per year. It's a layup by passive house standards, but every 5 years, that's going to drop until 2050. It hits zero. So when equity is centered in the development and implementation of BERDO, you're ensuring that the largest emitters are held accountable for their portion of the emissions, and that those most negatively impacted by those emissions are prioritized. So how did we achieve this, or how are we in the process of achieving this? Well, we needed community input, of course, both during the ordinance and regulations development process, but consistent community presence and really oversight throughout the lifespan of BERDO, so from now until 2050. So we worked with community-based organizations to inform, educate, receive direction, feedback on how to best shape the ordinance through an equity lens. And just to give a couple of examples, the community really pushed for the removal of carbon offsets as a pathway for compliance. So if an owner is to offset their energy consumption, they have to do so by on-site renewables, localized renewable electricity procurement, or payment through an alternative compliance pathway. And the intent is for decarbonization to remain as localized as possible. And that alternative compliance payment feeds directly into this Equitable Emissions Investment Fund. So again, it's funded by payments of BERDO participants that don't meet the emissions standard, and is used to prioritize projects that benefit environmental justice populations, or populations most impacted by air pollution. And just to tie this up, we have what's called a review board to evaluate alternative carbon abatement proposals. So hardship compliance plans, if Northeastern University wants to report as a portfolio as opposed to building by building, that goes to the review board. Input on future regulations, but most notably, how to allocate the funds from this Equitable Emissions Investment Fund. The community really pushed to have a review board consisting 2/3 of community-based organization nominated individuals, so that not only are community-based organizations present during the implementation of BERDO, they have a consistent presence throughout the lifespan of this ordinance. So I'll leave it there for now, but that's just a...
So one of the things that sounds very exciting about it to me is this idea that the carbon offsets are gone, because, like, let's get real, right? And rather than putting that money out into the financial system, which could end up anywhere, you're keeping the money in the city and keeping it in the community. And that seems to strike at one of the biggest concerns, is like with any of these programs, are you ultimately keeping the wealth in the community and building it and building legacy, generational wealth that you can pass forward, right? I wonder, what is the time frame in terms of implementation now? I know the first reporting just happened, and when do you think we'll start to see some money flow, and what kind of magnitude are we talking about? And if you just let everybody know, what size buildings are we talking about?
We're talking about buildings that are 20,000 square feet or above for non-residential, and then residential buildings that are 15 units or above.
50 or above?
15.
15 or above.
15, yeah. And this is the first year of reporting under this new BERDO ordinance. But we're really just looking at reporting and verifying the data this year. The emission standard is going to kick in 2025. So we're saying, everyone report, get your data clean so you can be confident in making these decarbonization decisions. And the establishment of this review board and this fund is very much in the works. I mean, we're undergoing the regulations process now. We're writing the regulations, and you know, what I would say to everyone here is, you know, if you have something to say about this, get involved. You know, don't make the presumption that cities, states, utilities know what's best for the community. If you have something to say, drive the conversation during these regulations processes. So I'll leave it there.
Do they have a sense of magnitude of the dollars that they expect to collect from this? Or it's a wait and see?
Right now, I can't say. All I can say is there are 3,900 properties in Boston that have to comply with BERDO. And, you know, you can look at the disclosure information from previous years and calculate how many might expect to meet the carbon emission standards in 2025. Do the math on what that alternative compliance payment would be if they don't. But we don't have that quite worked out yet.
And what do you see with the building owners right now with respect to Verdo in terms of investing in lowering the carbon output, doing things like passive house upgrades, as crazy as that might sound?
Yeah, I mean, we're having these, right now we're saying, you know, get your data, benchmark, get it clean.
It's a benchmark.
And find out where the low-hanging fruit is within your portfolio. Start to focus on those properties. And then we have a webinar next week with Rocky Mountain Institute, actually, going over how to prepare a zero overtime plan. I think a lot of owners are looking at zero emissions and freaking out about it. You know, it has to be taken step by step. And so I encourage those interested to join that webinar. But yeah, take it one step at a time.
Yeah, no, it's exciting. I mean, it's exciting to see the damage tied to benefit and like having that linkage. But at the same time, right, the problem's so much bigger than any one program. Yeah, it's just, but it's a great, it sounds like a great step in the right direction in terms of framing and everything. I wonder, Greg, you have a reaction to like that framing?
Yeah, so I think the BERDO 2.0 program is, you know, a promising program, but some of us have been a bit disappointed that it didn't go further, that it didn't include, you know, Boston has quite a few three-family, what we call them triple deckers around here, you know, in our aging portfolio, primarily in environmental justice communities. And those are typically owned by landlords who may be absentee landlords. They don't have to comply. And so to me, that is one of a lost opportunity, in so much that if we can get those ordinances moved downstream, we'll be able to help create more incentives for decarbonizing, you know, a large percentage of the housing stock that exists in the environmental justice communities that we continue to say we want to try to, you know, help from previous harm that's been done there. I mean, environmental justice communities are designated so because typically they've been the victims of pollution and other environments. Typically, I mean, I grew up in Pennsylvania. My mother was one of 13 kids. My father worked in a steel mill. Our home was in a housing project in a steel mill. So guess what? I was asthmatic as a kid because we're right in the steel mill, and I remember shoveling coal as to keep our fire going in the place we lived. And so, you know, that's sort of the poster child for environmental injustice. And I think we owe the environmental justice communities that we so frequently speak about, you know, an opportunity to transition to a cleaner and healthier environment. And so my view is that BERDO 2.0 could be expanded with a lot of good. And I would encourage the city of Boston to consider doing so that we get more houses, moving more towards like a passive house goal.
Can I add, well, I don't know if anybody knows cricket, but that's a sticky wicket. Um, when I could speak from watching my mother trying to go through that process of, we have a multifamily home and it's in fairly good condition, but it's not airtight. It's well insulated, but there's still points of pain when it comes to water. And water is the evil of passive house design because it creates mold. And if you can't get the seal of the house protected because one program overlays another program that's prohibitive for getting the end result of a passive house is a challenge. And that challenge is the lowest of the low hanging fruit. And we got to be able to integrate these savings because you're helping on one hand and then you're punishing on the other. So how do we collectively understand this is where we start? Because as mentioned, triple deckers is the stock of Boston, and multifamily homes it's what Boston's residential stock is greatly comprised of. And if you were able to adjust that, you've hit a home run. So that's the only point that I would really like to take away from this today. And it sadly enough, it turns into that disparity of funding, of earned income. Because most of the multi family units are occupied by those who aren't even halfway to the poverty level. And that's a huge issue.
Yeah. Well, that you just brought up like a whole array of things there, Corey.
Sorry.
It's great. I think one thing that jumps to mind in the first part, I think what you're saying, this idea of water damage in building and passive house. We're acutely aware of it in passive house, and I think at the same time it's a common building problem, right? Part of the issue is to replace the severely damaged building stock that we have from water damage that's been from disrepair one way or another. But the opportunity there for a holistic approach, the passive house forces us to look at the whole system, to deal with those basic fundamental issues, but also then elevate it. And so in training and investing in the buildings, whether it's the retrofits of triple deckers, the triple decker challenge, or the training programs, I'm wondering, that's one part. Well, why don't we leave it there for the moment? I was going to wonder, Bev, if you could comment on some of the things that you've done or thinking about doing and or coming down the pike specifically, and in relation to thinking how passive house may or may not be affecting how you're thinking about it.
So I guess this is true. Most of you probably who work in passive house are feeling that there's not enough people working in the trades, right? Is this, yeah. And I think when we're thinking about the jobs that will be created when we get to net zero, whether it's through retrofitting triple deckers or it's new construction, passive house, the vast majority of those jobs are trade jobs, right? And I think we have maybe for 20 years been telling people you need to get a college education or you're not gonna have a good job. Well, not really true. There's a lot of great trade jobs that make, it's a long route to become an electrician, but we probably need 6 times as many as we have here in Massachusetts to hit our net zero goals. But we need to start communicating that is a wonderful path and getting young people started on that path and supporting them in that path. And same thing for HVAC. So heat pumps, I think it was mentioned earlier today, Mass Save has this $10,000 incentive for whole home heat pumps. Well, you can't find a heat pump installer right now who actually knows how to do whole home because they are backed up for the next year because of that incentive. So how do we train people? I mean, I think typically it's a long training program. And does it have to be? I hope not. Like, I think there's some ways to shorten it so your expertise isn't in every kind of fossil fuel equipment, but it's just in the heat pump side of things. So I do think we need to, and then carpentry. We need to teach carpenters high performance carpentry. And you're starting to see, I know Studio for High Performance Design and Construction has been working on, very hands-on course for people who already know, who are lead carpenters already, but they just need to learn, they need to do hands-on work installing those high-performance windows. And we need many, many, many more of those kinds of training programs. I think historically, maybe we've done a little bit too much workforce development that's focused on architecture, like people who are upskilling existing workers and not really thinking about bringing in new people. We really do need to bring a lot of new people in.
Yeah, and I wonder in terms of the jobs program, the one thing, there's so much happening in Massachusetts. The one thing that, and maybe I'm just missing it, that I don't see that has been successful, I believe in British Columbia and other places, is manufacturing. That there's opportunity with Passive House, with the components. I mean, a big push of the Passive House Institute in general around the world is we need local supply of components to make it accessible and affordable, and from our perspective, have employment, wealth in the community. Is there been any activity around manufacturing or thinking about it? And it could be something that Berto funds.
I think there's a lot of interest in the energy sprung model, but I also don't. Well, first of all,
Right.
Massachusetts, we sort of have to think as a region because local really means, if we're looking for wood fiberboard insulation, Maine's probably a better place for us to look for that for component manufacturers. So there's some limitations, but I see no reason why we can't have, whether it's highly, blueprint robotics, very automated, or even just stick building panels, high performance panels under a roof. I do think there's a huge interest in that, but I don't see the incentives there for that, or even the sort of pilots yet in the state.
Yeah, I think there's also, reality around, the ecosystem that's currently in place. A lot of what we're relying on today for infrastructure, kind of is energy efficiency. And we're not going to efficiency our way to zero. I think, we have to start looking at, perhaps an organization like Mass CEC evolving into becoming our decarbonization agency statewide, so that it can help integrate some of these different activities. For instance, right now, Mass CEC is doing a phenomenal job of actually getting our offshore wind industry creative. It's built a terminal, it's created programs around training and other supply chain issues, looking at the entire need for that industry in a very integrated way. And I think we need a similar approach around decarbonization of buildings, that it's a completely integrated approach, not relying solely on energy efficiency, but looking at all of the tools, manufacturing tools, energy efficiency, renewable energy, you're getting rid of embodied carbon, and doing so in a way that doesn't duplicate effort, but actually leverages existing infrastructure and does so in a more integrated way.
Yeah, it sounds like bits and pieces of all of this that it's really a holistic effort, right? In terms of the training, the projects, the businesses, what's produced, and I'm wondering if there is a mechanism, a vision of really bringing all those things together. It seems like as much as everybody wants to, everything's still very siloed, right? Everybody's got their bit in the puzzle. And I'm wondering if, you know, because we're talking about Passive House, if Passive House is a potential vehicle for that kind of integration, where you have training from a very basic level to a very advanced level. You have from manufacturing to final product, you have health outcomes as well as, um, uh, you know, cost of living outcomes and so forth. And I'm just wondering, you know, if we could imagine a program maybe, because one of the things that sticks in my mind still is like, okay, there sounds like a lot of great programs coming down the road, but in 10 years from now, are we going to be having the same conversation? Like, what's going to change? So, you know, how do we recombine somehow?
Yeah, I would say that, you know, Governor Patrick, when he created the Mass Clean Energy Center, did so because he believed that we needed a state agency focused on, you know, helping accelerate market adoption of clean, you know, clean energy. And Mass CEC has, over the years, developed a phenomenal workforce development program, and they've been expert program managers. So I actually think we have the solution for our future needs. We just have to get more funding in the Mass CEC so it can be scaled up to meet the challenge. I mean, our climate goal in Massachusetts are no longer aspirational; they're statute. And so things have gotten serious now. We have to really start recognizing that the status quo, the disintegrated approach to trying to solve problems isn't going to get us there fast enough.
But so it's interesting. Well, sorry, go ahead, Corey.
Well, I'm sorry, I'm about to attack the city, so.
It took you long enough, Corey. Come on.
Well, I can make a suggestion for some of that Bordeaux money. And really, it comes down to talking about silos, right? And if we know the silos exist, can we get the city to have inspectors that know just because you turn the studs on their side doesn't make it fail? I mean, those are basic little things that I think, and I see it. That's why I'm saying it. And, you know, this is at the granular level. But if you can't get it right at the granular level, when you start exponentially growing a building and can't just get the basics right because you're challenged going back to prefab. When you have a prefab modular panel where it does not look like what it does in the field where inspectors know and they get it on the site, and then you're now faced with educating that inspector, and now your times, that costs you a week, you know, and time is of the essence when you're building. And because we have to be so competitive, and as a developer myself, for affordable luxury homes, and the luxury came because it's really at market. And that market is a luxury these days. And if we can help the timeline by increasing the knowledge for what a building looks like, from the modular to the stick built, we've done more for the industry in my eyes just by doing that and having a conversation with all of the players in the room, not piecemealing everything. And I'm looking at someone that I admire a lot, Hank. Yes, he woke up. You know, you know. I'm sorry. I'm a sidetrack from right now. I've been seeing people that I've only seen on Zoom, for the last 3 years. And it's a pleasure to be in a room with all of them at one time and get to put these ideas on the floor so that when we go back to our office, we go back to our community, we now enrich with tools, little tools that make difference.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, both the Zoom and meeting and going forward, but also the training of the regulators. And I think the big, one great inspiration for us and a great frustration is that in Vancouver, to their great credit, when they pushed Passive House, they underwent a massive training investment to their building department and other regulators that were involved in that system. And it really has, I think, been a major factor in them being able to accelerate Passive House adoption as a huge thing. It can't be understated, and it's worth investing in. We see New York doing it in bits and pieces, but not with the coordinated effort. And I wanted to follow up, Greg, on your comment, that this is the law, this decarbonization, right? Like this is coming, so all this money is going to be spent on that. But there's no law about ending the inequity, right? That's gonna keep going. Unless things change radically in how we're doing it.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to keep going unless we change it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's really about us, right? This isn't something the government needs to lead. This is something we need to lead as project developers and architects and engineers. It's really up to us to go the extra mile to try to cultivate and mentor. Often I get calls from companies saying, what can we do to help diversify the clean energy industry? I say, well, you have employees on your staff with expertise. Why not mentor? Why not get involved in a program where we're trying to upskill or bring young people of color into a career pathway and spend time, helping those young people, learn from those who've really been doing it for a while and get them excited about careers. I mean, we've spoken earlier about the need for more trades. We need to, the trades have gotten a bad rap, because of the indoctrination around you have to go to a 4-year school to get a good job. That's just no longer the case. We need skilled workers, highly skilled workers, to meet our climate goals. And so there's an opportunity for young people to get involved in a pathway that doesn't require a 4-year degree, that pays a career, a family-sustaining salary, and that is recession-proof. Our buildings are moving, so these jobs aren't going overseas. This is work that we need to do, in our buildings, and we need to do it in speed. I was actually quite blown away by some data from Rewiring America. They estimate there's 1 billion fossil fuel devices in American homes. That means we have to do 500,000 devices a month for the next 25 years. So that just gives you a sense of the scale of the challenge we have and why it's so important that we don't go into this without recognizing that it's all of us. It's everyone we can get our hands on. We need to get engaged in work towards a net zero future.
Right. That's great. And so I want to extend it then. So as we close out here, extending this inequity is unacceptable and it has to change. And so throwing down the gauntlet to the Passive House community in terms of us implementing high performance building and acting with government, communities, individuals, what is your ask of the Passive House community to do its part to make the change that we need to see?
So I have 2 things. If you're an architect, an engineer, a developer, look harder for minority and women-owned subs and businesses that you can incorporate in your process. So on our earlier panel, Emerald Cities has a whole contractor training academy. There are a lot of youth who go into these trades and will work for somebody else for 10 years, but like to create their own business is a big step. So like, how can you mentor and help with that as well? And then you individually do find someone to mentor. It sounds like it's hard, it's not hard. And you as a professional who's working out there in the world, you have so many connections, it just comes naturally to you. Somebody who's new in the field, they don't have those connections. So even just introducing people is amazingly helpful for someone. So don't underestimate how helpful it can be to mentor someone.
I'll say again, get involved in these ordinance, regulations, stretch code development processes. We very much value your expertise in this. It's needed, and that's sort of on a larger scale. But individually, if you're having conversations with owners, property managers, whoever else, just talk to them about why these standards are important. And I think the link between the work we do and equity isn't always intuitive. So, these programs are successful when compliance is high, and keeping everyone well informed as to the full impact, it's fully necessary.
It's a challenge that I'm putting to the floor, that if everyone would go to an elementary school and just talk about what you do. Just talk about what you do. And maybe one of those kids will stand up and say, instead of being a turtle protector, they want to be a passive house designer. Period.
Perfect ending, Corey. Thank you. Thank you all.